Hi, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what we call the incumbency advantage. And there's kind of an irony in American politics that we tend to not think Congress does a very good job. In fact, when we poll people and ask them how they think Congress is doing, we almost always get a pretty dismal report. Here's an example. See how fast my internet's going to be today. This is an organization called pollingreport.com, and they actually do a pretty good job of pulling together lots of different kinds of polls on lots of different kinds of things. And so what this is about Congress's job rating, and as you can see in the most recent polls that they've reported, and these polls go back quite a long time, you can see that there's almost always a huge gap between those who approve of the job that Congress is doing and the people who disapprove of the job Congress is doing. And you can see that Congress is quite unpopular most of the time. And yet, we elect the same people over and over and over again to the same positions in Congress. So it's kind of ironic. If we don't think they're doing a very good job, why do we keep re-electing the same people over and over again? Well, it turns out we tend to not like other people's members of Congress, but we like our own members of Congress just fine. So we keep re-electing them over and over again. And I want to talk about some of the reasons political scientists have ascribe to what we call the incumbency advantage. So the incumbency advantage is the fact that members of Congress who choose to run for re-election are usually successful. And the re-election rates are actually quite high. Now, this doesn't take into account the fact that some members of Congress choose to retire, especially if they think they won't get reelected if they run. But members of Congress who choose to run for re-election are usually successful. And if we go to this organization called opensecrets.org, which I think I've showed you before, they have a really, really good database about money in politics, but they also have this kind of cool graph that shows re-election rates over the years. This is the re-election rates for the House of Representatives from 1964 until the most recent election in 2018. And keeping in mind that in 2018, enough seats in the House of Representatives shifted from Republican control to Democratic control that the Democrats took control of the House of Representatives. But 91% of members of the House who chose to run for re-election got re-elected. So even though 2018 was a really important election in terms of the outcome of the election, a lot of the seats that the Democrats picked up were seats where a Republican had retired, and a few Republicans lost their seats. But still, the incumbency advantage held true, even though the outcome of the election was quite a big change in who holds power in the House of Representatives. Senate races are usually a little bit more competitive, mostly because members of the Senate represent an entire state, which means that they tend to attract much more capable opponents. And so people who are well-known or who hold other state offices are more likely to run for Senate, kind of give those senators a run for their money. But still, well over 80% of members of the Senate who choose to run for re-election every election are successful. And that's what we call the incumbency advantage. And I want to talk about 4 things that help explain the incumbency advantage: name recognition, favorable district boundary lines, a fundraising advantage, and the ability to do district services such as casework. I'll do the first one without another slide because it's pretty quick. Most people who run for Congress, who hold congressional seats, are better known than the people who run against them. In fact, in the House of Representatives, incumbent members of the House of Representatives usually don't get a serious challenge from somebody who's very well known within the district. Senators, again, maybe get a more well-known challenger, but by and large, members of the House and members of the Senate are better known in their districts. And political scientists who study these things have attributed somewhere between 5 and 7% of the vote just to the fact that somebody recognizes their name on the ballot, even if they don't know anything else about them. Favorable district boundary lines are also a really important part of the incumbency advantage. About 90% of the seats in the House of Representatives are what we call safe seats. That means over 400 of the 435 seats are not really very competitive between the two political parties. They are safe for one party or the other. And we measure that by looking at voter registration statistics. So, for example, if a congressional district has a 60-40 Republican majority in terms of voter registration, where 60% of the people who are registered with a political party are registered Republicans and 40% are registered Democrats, that would be considered a safe seat for the Republican Party, regardless of who holds the seat, because most people vote party line. So part of the incumbency advantage, a big part of the incumbency advantage, is due to safe seats. And some seats are safe because of geography. So, for example, San Francisco has a lot of safe Democratic seats. That's not because the district boundary lines were intentionally drawn to benefit the Democratic Party. That's what we call gerrymandering. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But those seats are safe because there just aren't very many Republicans who live in San Francisco compared to the overwhelming number of Democrats who live in San Francisco. The same holds true in big cities like Los Angeles and Chicago, and even in places that are much more conservative like Texas. You still get a lot of Democratic seats in places like Austin and Dallas. The process of drawing district boundary lines and that results in these safe seats starts with what's called reapportionment. And there's some stuff in your textbook about this, but I just wanted to go over it really briefly and just to make sure that everybody understands what happens every 10 years, because we're getting ready to do this again after the 2020 census. So what reapportionment does is it gives each state its correct number of representatives in the House of Representatives. Every state gets 2 seats in the Senate, so this doesn't apply for the Senate. But for the House of Representatives, seats are allocated to the states based on their population. So, for example, California has about 12% of the U.S. population, so we get about 12% of the seats in the House. Right now, California has 53 seats in the House of Representatives. That process is done after every census. So in 2020, we're going to count all the people in the United States. If you follow the news, you'll know that there's a big controversy going on right now about whether or not the census should include a question about citizenship. Democrats are fighting that, Republicans are pushing for that, and the Supreme Court just heard arguments from both sides, and they'll make a decision pretty quick probably about whether or not there's going to be a citizenship question on the census. But after the census is done, we use a process called the method of equal proportions to allocate the 435 seats in the House to the 50 states. So every state starts with 1, and then the state with the highest population gets another seat, and then they say, okay, what's the next highest population state? And then they get a seat. And they just keep doing that until they've allocated all 435 seats so that each state gets its appropriate number of seats. And sometimes that means a state will gain some seats. Sometimes it means a state loses seats. We don't know what will happen. Some people think that California might actually lose a seat in the House after the 2020 census, simply because other parts of the country are growing at a faster clip than California. But we won't know until after the method of equal proportions is applied. This is what the current, this is kind of a blurry picture, sorry about that. This is what the current district boundary lines look like for the state of California. You can see that we have, you can't really see, but pretend you can see, we have 53 seats in the House of Representatives, and they're drawn by a citizen commission in California. We don't allow politicians to draw our district boundary lines in California, but you can see that some of these districts are really large and some of these districts are really small geographically. But each of these districts, at the time the district boundaries were drawn in 2011, after the 2010 census, each of these districts had approximately the same number of people in them. That's why they're so geographically different in size, because each district has to have about the same number of people. In fact, the requirement that each district be equal in population is referred to as the one person, one vote principle. And this holds true across the country. So from California all the way up to Maine, each congressional district will have about the same number of people in it at the time the district boundary lines are drawn. And that's reflective of what's called the one person, one vote principle, which was established in a Supreme Court case back in 1962 called Baker versus Carr. What was happening is a lot of states, primarily to keep people of color from achieving political power, states would draw their district boundary lines so that they were grossly disproportionate in terms of size. And what the Supreme Court ruled in 1962 is that because everybody is entitled to the equal protection of the law, it means that everybody's vote needs to count the same, which means each district has to have about the same number of people in it. So from district to district to district, everybody in those districts' vote counts the same toward electing somebody to that office, whether it be the House of Representatives or a California state legislative seat or even a city council district. They all have to have about the same number of people relative to the other districts for the same office. The other legal requirements of redistricting are not really as strict as the one person, one vote rule, but they're legal requirements nonetheless. The first is that the districts must be geographically contiguous. And what that means is that each part of the district each district has to be self-contained. So for example, it wouldn't be allowed for part of Northern California and part of Southern California to be in the same congressional district. If the people drawing the district boundary lines really, really wanted to do that, they would have to connect Northern and Southern California, like along I-5 or something like that. But mostly it means that they have to be geographically contiguous. Now, if a state includes islands and there's no bridge to that island, then obviously part of the district might have to not be geographically contiguous because you can't leave the islands out. But for the most part, they have to be geographically contiguous. And then the people who are drawing the district boundary lines, whether it's the state legislature or in California, our redistricting commission, the Supreme Court has said that they should try as best they can to maintain political communities together so that everybody who lives in the political community can go to the same person to try to get change. So for example, we try to keep cities together. We try to keep counties together. Where that's not possible, for example, Los Angeles County has more than 10 million people in it. So if each district has to have 800,000 people, you can't have a district with 10 million people. So you have to break the county of Los Angeles up. So then you might want to look at the cities within Los Angeles. You might want to keep Hollywood together. You might want to keep Pasadena together, etc. So if you look at a map of California, you would find, for example, that most of the city of Sacramento is located within one congressional district. And then some parts of the county are located in a different congressional district because Sacramento County is too big to fit into one House district. One of the biggest controversies about redistricting is what we call gerrymandering. So what this cartoon illustrates is the problem of gerrymandering. So back then, this is back when the Constitution was written, you have an advocate saying voters should select their own elected representatives. The problem with gerrymandering is it allows politicians to choose their own voters. By drawing district boundary lines that favor one political party or another, politicians can effectively rig the game so that their side will win. And it's very controversial, and there are two really big, important Supreme Court cases pending before the court this year having to do with gerrymandering. The process of drawing district boundary lines for political purposes is called gerrymandering. It's been around since the beginning of the country. It's been done since pretty much districts got created in the United States. And it's gotten more and more and more controversial over time as computer programming has made gerrymandering more and more precise. And basically, there are two types of gerrymandering. There's what we call packing and there's what we call cracking. Packing is the process of taking a group of people, whether it is a racial minority or a partisan group like Democrats or Republicans, and packing them all into one group, into one district by drawing the district boundary lines around the areas where those people live so that they're concentrated in just a few districts. And if you can do that, you can ensure that your party gets all the rest of the districts, because there would be a disproportionate number of, say, Democrats in just a couple of districts, and then the Republicans would be the majority in the rest, or a disproportionate number of Democrats if the Democrats control the process, they would put a disproportionate number of Republicans into just a few districts, and then the Democrats would get all the rest of the districts. The other type of gerrymandering is what's referred to as cracking. And what that is where if there's a group of people concentrated in one area, say Democrats in Austin, Texas, if the legislature can get away with it, they might want to crack the city of Austin into several different congressional districts so that the Democrats are diffused, or the Republicans, if it's the Democrats doing the gerrymandering, are diffused into a bunch of different districts so that the party that is controlling the gerrymandering will win those districts because there aren't enough of the other party in those districts. Partisan gerrymandering has never been ruled unconstitutional. The Supreme Court has never said that either packing or cracking is unconstitutional. There are two cases testing that before the Supreme Court this year, but for now, partisan gerrymandering is constitutional. Racial gerrymandering is unconstitutional if it's cracking. So if there is a finding by a court that a district plan, a redistricting map, has intentionally broken apart the voting power of people of color, the Supreme Court has found that that process violates the 14th Amendment guarantee of equal protection under the law, is unconstitutional racial gerrymandering. If you think back to the discussion that we had in this class about the 14th Amendment, if you remember strict scrutiny, laws that discriminate on the basis of race have to serve a compelling government interest. And the court has said there can be no compelling government interest in keeping people of color from electing people of color to office. So racial cracking is unconstitutional, but partisan gerrymandering, both packing and cracking, is okay for now. I just want to show you a couple of examples of gerrymandering. These are current gerrymanders, and you can see these districts are geographically contiguous, but they're strangely shaped. It's hard to imagine that the people drawing these district boundary lines didn't do this for partisan purposes, to keep their political party in power. This is North Carolina, and you can see, oh, sorry, they used to have them all listed one after the other, but now they have it like this. These are funny little, this looks like an elephant to me. That looks like his trunk. But this is Florida, and you can see that this is a really weirdly drawn district. That's a gerrymandered district. And here's another one that's hard to imagine any purpose other than some sort of political gain that would cause them to draw the district boundary lines so strangely. This website actually has lots of them, but I won't show you all of them. So that's gerrymandering. Safe seats for one party or the other, either through gerrymandering or through the fact that lots of people from one party live in one geographic area, is one part of the incumbency advantage. Incumbents also enjoy a huge fundraising advantage, and I mean a huge fundraising advantage. What that means is that incumbents can usually raise as much money as they think they're going to need to get reelected. And challengers, the people who run against the incumbents, can almost never raise as much money as the incumbent. That's part of the reason members of the House of Representatives don't tend to get very strong challengers, because they know they're not going to be able to raise as much money. Again, if we go back to opensecrets.org, you can see the incumbency advantage. This is from the 2018 election cycle. And what you can see is in the House of Representatives, for example, the average raised by an incumbent was almost $2 million. The average raised by a challenger was a fraction of that. Open seats are seats where there's no incumbent running, that somebody has retired and is not running for re-election. And you can see in the Senate, there's a huge, even more huge, if you will, incumbency advantage. $15 million on average raised by Senate incumbents versus $2 million on average raised by challengers. Part of the reason they're able to do that is because interest groups are very practical in who they give their money to. They want to give money to incumbents to hopefully secure good votes and to support people who support their political agenda. But also, they tend not to give a lot of money to challengers because challengers never win. So it's kind of a catch-22. You can't raise a lot of money if you don't have a hope of winning. And if you don't have a hope of winning, you can't raise any money. And so usually the people who get the most serious challenges, the incumbents who get the most serious challenges, are people who are involved in some sort of scandal or who have done something. They voted against their district a significant number of times or something like that. Every once in a while, there's a surprise. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez beat an incumbent in the primary, in the Democratic primary, and surprised everybody. Nobody saw it coming. Just one of those things. But most of the time, incumbents have a huge fundraising advantage. The money that is raised by incumbents, and I just kind of wanted to point this out to you, is what we call hard money. So the money that candidates raise that they have control over, that money that I just showed you in that slide, I think I put it in this PowerPoint twice, most of that money goes to incumbents. That's what we call hard money. That's not the money that's raised by super PACs or PACs. That money goes directly to the candidates. And again, it's regulated. There's a limit to how much an individual person or a political action committee can give to a candidate running for office. But even under the restrictions of the Federal Elections Campaign Act, they can raise an awful lot of money. The last thing that I wanted to talk about are what we call district services. If a person already holds office, they have staff whose sole responsibility is to help the people in their district, we call those people constituents, get things done. So for example, if say your grandmother lives with you and she lives on her Social Security check, and at some point she stops getting her Social Security check, there's obviously been some sort of glitch. So grandma calls the Social Security Administration and they tell her there's nothing wrong, that she should still be getting her checks, that in fact, when they go back and look again, they find that they stopped paying her because they thought she was dead, but she's not dead. So you can go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth with the Social Security Administration, or you can call your member of the House of Representatives or call your United States Senator. You might not get a chance to talk to them directly, but they will assign a staff person who will intervene on your behalf to see if they can get through that government red tape. So if you go to most people who live in the city of Sacramento are represented by Doris Matsui, and she has on her website a section of her website where you can request help with a federal agency. It's called Casework, and she will be happy to assist you with any problem you might be having with any federal agent. And so you can email her, you can just link to where you can get information, and there's all kinds of information, different ways that you can contact her. Now, if you're an incumbent, you have a website that's maintained by you, and it's posted on the federal government's House website. And if you're a challenger, you probably can't do that. So district services, favorable districting, a fundraising advantage, and better name recognition all add up to this huge incumbency advantage where members of the House tend to get reelected and the Senate tend to get reelected over and over again, even though we don't think Congress does a very good job. So it's pretty good job security for people who are doing a job that most people think they're not doing a very good job. Turns out we don't like Congress, but we like our own member of Congress. So when we say we should throw the rascals out, we don't really mean that we should throw our rascal out most of the time. Thanks for watching.